She survived exile. He did not survive longing. The Patmore Chronicles. Dear readers, this season has bestowed upon us the most closely watched marriage in all of Mayfair, and, I dare say, the one most utterly devoid of human warmth these pages have ever recorded. When His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, led Miss Evangeline Hartley to the altar, all of London held its breath. Not from the thrill of love, let it be understood, but from the calculated perfection of the arrangement. She, beautiful, accomplished, of impeccable lineage. He, powerful, austere, the owner of a reputation as solid as the stones of his ancestral estate. Together, they formed the portrait society demands, and so rarely questions. Yet this chronicler, who observes from where wedding cakes are arranged and secrets are served with champagne, knows that some arrangements begin cold and end frozen. One is left to wonder whether ice, when grown too thick, might one day crack. Signed, Tom Patmore. James Spencer adjusted the final layer of icing atop the three-tiered structure that dominated the center of the Montclair ballroom table. The wedding cake was a work of edible architecture. Towers of meringue, sugar flowers in shades of ivory and gold, details that mimicked French lace. Perfect, impeccable. Exactly like the bride who at that very moment was graciously waving to guests across the room. He wiped his hands on his apron and stepped back 2 paces, observing, not the cake, but the scene. Evangeline Hartley, now Duchess of Ashford, was smiling. A studied smile, trained since childhood to convey charm without commitment. At her side, the Duke maintained an upright posture, his gaze fixed somewhere above the heads of the crowd, as though he were fulfilling a civic obligation rather than celebrating his nuptials. James knew that kind of marriage. Everyone did. "The icing is divine, Mr. Spencer," Lady Pembroke remarked, approaching the table with a feathered fan. "Almost a pity to cut it." "You are most kind, your ladyship," James replied, inclining his head. "Tell me," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "have you ever seen a couple so appropriate?" James smiled discreetly. Appropriate. The word society used when in love would not suffice. "Certainly a match of great distinction, milady." Lady Pembroke released a restrained laugh. "Distinction, yes. But warmth? Ah, my dear confectioner, I fear even your sweets held more sweetness than that altar did today." And she drifted away, leaving James alone with his observations and his mental notes. The marriage had been announced with great pomp in the Times 3 months earlier. His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, has the honor of announcing his engagement to Miss Evangeline Hartley, daughter of the late Baron Hartley of Gloucestershire. Late. The word that transformed a young woman into valuable merchandise on the matrimonial market, provided she possessed good lineage, exemplary education, and a modest yet respectable dowry. Evangeline possessed all of that. She also possessed something no one mentioned aloud, the silent urgency of one who no longer had a father to protect her, nor brothers to sustain her. At 23, she stood at the perilous threshold between eligible and left on the shelf. The Duke of Ashford had emerged as the perfect solution, not for her, but for the problem she represented. He, in turn, needed a duchess, not a companion, not a confidant, simply someone who could bear the title without staining the name, preside over dinners without causing scandal, smile for portraits without demanding attention behind the scenes. Evangeline Hartley was ideal for the position, and she accepted, because refusing a duke, especially when there were no other offers, would have been unwise. The honeymoon was brief, 5 days in Bath, conducted in polite silence. He read the newspaper at breakfast. She embroidered in the sitting room. At night, they fulfilled their marital duty with the efficiency of those signing contracts. No tenderness, no conversation beyond what was strictly necessary. Upon returning to London, they established separate routines. She organized teas, supervised the household staff, visited orphanages, everything a duchess was expected to do. In public, they were the portrait of aristocratic harmony. In private, they were strangers sharing a surname. 6 months passed. 6 months of silent dinners, of good morning, Your Grace, and good night, Your Grace, of separate beds. He in the ducal chamber, she in the Duchess's suite, a locked door between them. It was during a ball at the residence of the Viscount and Viscountess of Ravenscourt that James Spencer noticed the change. He was arranging pistachio eclairs on a silver tray when he overheard the murmurs. "They say she still isn't, well, you know. 6 months, and not a single heir even on the way? Perhaps the Duke is disappointed, or perhaps she is inadequate." James kept his eyes on his work, but his ears attentive. He attended Parliament, clubs, meetings with lawyers and estate administrators. Society ladies had a habit of ignoring servants, and he, with his white apron and busy hands, was practically invisible. "I hear he scarcely speaks to her." "A marriage of convenience, my dear. You didn't expect love, did you?" "Not love, but at least functionality." The laughter was discreet, cruel. Across the ballroom, Evangeline was dancing a waltz with an elegant gentleman in his 50s, his expression serene, his posture impeccable. If she heard the whispers, she gave no sign. But James saw. He saw the way her fingers tightened around her fan. He saw the smile that never reached her eyes. 2 weeks later, the Duke of Ashford made a decision. He summoned his wife to his study. Not the bedchamber, not the sitting room, the study, as though it were a formal audience. "Please sit," he said, indicating the chair before the mahogany desk. Evangeline obeyed, her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the window overlooking the gardens. "I have been reflecting on our situation," he began, his voice controlled, devoid of emotional inflection. "And I have come to the conclusion that it would be unbeneficial to have a period of separation." Silence. Evangeline did not move. "A separation, Your Grace?" she asked calmly. "Temporary, naturally." He finally turned to face her. "I own an estate in Yorkshire. Isolated, quiet, suitable for reflection." She understood immediately. This was not an invitation. It was an exile. "I understand," she said, and nothing more. "Society will be informed that you require rest. Health concerns, nothing scandalous, merely discretion, discretion. The aristocracy's favorite word for concealing shame. And for how long does Your Grace believe this rest will be necessary?" He hesitated, only for a second. But it was enough for her to grasp the truth. He did not know. Perhaps months, perhaps years, perhaps forever. "As long as necessary," he replied, turning back to the window. Evangeline rose. She executed a flawless curtsy. "As you wish, your grace." And she left the study with the dignity of one who had just been sentenced, yet refused to beg. The departure was arranged within 3 days. Trunks were packed, farewell letters were written, short, formal, devoid of emotion. The servants whispered among themselves, but no one dared ask outright. On the morning of the journey, Evangeline descended the grand staircase dressed in shades of grey and navy blue, the colours of discreet mourning. She was not mourning the dead. She was mourning a marriage that had never truly existed. The Duke did not come down to bid her farewell. He sent the butler instead, bearing a message. "May you have a safe journey." Evangeline entered the carriage without looking back. As the horses' hooves echoed over the cobblestones of Mayfair, James Spencer watched from the window of his confectionery on the corner. He saw the Duchess step into the carriage, saw the door close, saw the procession depart northward, and he also saw, reflected in the carriage window, the single tear Evangeline allowed herself to shed. And while Mayfair raised a toast to the Duke's preserved reputation, she departed alone, unaware that this farewell would not be an end, but the beginning of something irreversible. That evening, at his desk above the confectionery, James dipped his pen into ink and began to write. London celebrates discretion, but this chronicler knows that there are exiles that never appear in the papers, and wounds no decree can heal. When a duchess departs alone at dawn, without farewells, without witnesses beyond the horses and the cold wind, this is not rest. It is abandonment dressed in decorum. And while Mayfair toasted the Duke's preserved reputation, she departed alone, unaware that this farewell would not be an end, but the beginning of something irreversible. He signed, T.P., and blew gently on the ink, pondering what would come next. By morning, a new edition of the gossip serial was circulating throughout the city. The Patmore Chronicles. Esteemed readers of high society, 8 months have passed since the Duchess of Ashford departed to recover her delicate health on the distant lands of Yorkshire. 8 months during which Mayfair has learned not to ask, not to mention, not to remember. Yet this chronicler, who never forgets the bitter taste of a poorly kept secret, observes with curiosity, while she has vanished from sight and memory alike, the Duke remains, far too present. At balls, at dinners, at clubs, always impeccable, always correct, always accompanied by the same vacant expression one finds in a family portrait. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder. But what of a heart that stubbornly ignores the one who has gone? Does solitude punish only those who leave, or also those who remain? Signed, Tom Patmore. Yorkshire was grey, grey as the perpetually wintry sky, as the stones of Thornfield Hall, as the days that dragged on identical to one another, offering no promise of change. Evangeline Ashford, she still bore the name, though at times she forgot she possessed it, awoke every morning to the same silent routine. The room was spacious, well furnished, with moss-green velvet drapes, and a fireplace the servants kept lit. Comfortable, proper, empty. In the first days, she waited. She waited for a letter, a visit, a single word that might indicate he cared, even minimally, for her well-being. Nothing arrived. Only the courteous silence of the local staff, a middle-aged governess named Mrs. Dawson, 2 young maids, an elderly butler, and a groundskeeper who rarely appeared, all polite. all distant, all clearly instructed to treat her with respect, but without familiarity. She was the exiled Duchess, and everyone knew it. In the first weeks, Evangeline attempted to keep up appearances. She dressed properly each morning, carefully arranged her hair, and descended alone for breakfast in the vast dining hall, where her voice echoed against the walls. She read, she embroidered, she walked through the gardens when the rain allowed, and she waited. She wrote 3 letters to the Duke during that first month. The first, formal. Your Grace, I arrived safely at Thornfield Hall. The estate is suitable and the staff attentive. I await news from London. Respectfully, Evangeline. The second, shorter. Your Grace, I hope you are well. The winter here is harsh. I would be grateful for any correspondence. On the third, nearly desperate. Please, write. No reply came. It was on the morning she completed 2 months in Yorkshire that Evangeline understood the truth. He would not write. Not because he was too busy, nor because the letters had been lost, but because he simply did not think of her. She folded the last letter she had begun to write, "My dear," and tossed it into the fireplace. She watched the paper curl, darken, turn to ash, and something within her burned as well. The 3rd month was the worst. Evangeline spent entire days without leaving her room. She refused food, refused company. She sat by the window, staring out at the desolate landscape of moorland and mist, wondering whether it might have been better never to have accepted the proposal of marriage. But then, what would she have done? Become a governess? A companion to some wealthy widow? Fade away in the house of some distant relative who tolerated her out of obligation? There had been no choice. There never had. It was Mrs. Dawson who finally broke the cycle. She knocked one morning, entered without waiting for permission, and flung open the curtains with vigor. "Your Grace will rot in this room if you continue like this," she said bluntly. Evangeline blinked, startled by the frankness. "I don't—" "With your pardon, milady, but you are wasting away. And I will not stand by and watch a duchess, even a forgotten one, turn into a ghost while she is under my roof." There was something in the governess's voice. It was not pity. It was respect. Evangeline sat up on the bed, her hands trembling. "And what would you suggest I do, Mrs. Dawson?" she asked. "Pretend this is not Exile? Pretend that London, that anyone—" Her voice faltered. The governess stepped closer and sat on the edge of the bed, an improper gesture by aristocratic standards, but an honest one. "I do not suggest you pretend anything, milady. I suggest that you survive, and then when you have the strength, that you live." And so, slowly, Evangeline began to rebuild herself, not as a duchess, not as a wife, as a woman. She began to explore the estate. She discovered a forgotten library in the East Wing, filled with dusty volumes on botany, history, philosophy, books no lady of Mayfair would ever read, and which she devoured hungrily. She learned the names of the plants that grew wild on the moors. She began to draw. She began to write, not letters to the Duke, but notes to herself, thoughts, reflections, anger transformed into words. She spoke with Mrs. Dawson, with the maids, with the groundskeeper who taught her how to identify birds by their songs. She learned that there was life beyond the ballroom, that there was silence that was not loneliness, that there was strength that required no applause. At 6 months, Evangeline awoke one morning and realized she had not thought of the Duke upon opening her eyes. At 8 months, she realized she no longer wished to return. Meanwhile, in London, the Duke of Ashford maintained his impeccable routine. Parliament on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, White's Club on Tuesdays and Thursdays, social dinners on Saturdays, the opera on Sundays. Always punctual, always proper, always alone. At first, society praised his discretion. What a devoted husband, allowing his wife to recover in peace. But as the months passed, the murmurs shifted in tone. James Spencer heard it all, naturally. He was preparing petit four for a charitable tea at Lady Ashworth's residence when 2 matrons approached the dessert table. 8 months, one remarked, pinching a raspberry macaron. No visit. No public letter. They say he behaves as though she never existed, or as though he wishes she never had. Poor creature, trapped in Yorkshire while he what? Lives exactly as he always has? The other side, precisely. And that, my dear, is the cruelest part. James continued working, but he committed every word to memory. The Duke indeed carried on with his life, but something had changed. He himself could not say when it had begun. Perhaps in the 4th month, perhaps earlier. He had begun to notice things. The empty chair at the far end of the dining table, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the corridors. She used lavender sachets in the wardrobes. The absence of sound, of presence, of anything. He tried to ignore it. He kept himself occupied, signed documents, debated laws, managed estates. But at night, when he returned to the silent mansion, he felt it. It was not guilt. It was not remorse. It was emptiness. A void he could not fill with work, with prestige, with society's approval. He began to wake in the middle of the night, wondering whether she was well, whether she was cold, whether she was alone. Of course she is alone, you fool. You sent her there. He tried to write once. Sat at his desk, took up the pen, began, "My dear," and stopped. What could he say? "I hope you are well, though I am the one who condemned you to isolation. I miss you, though I never gave you reason to believe I cared." He crumpled the paper. He did not write. It was during a ball at the Marquess's of Holtford's residence, 9 months after Evangeline's departure, that something inside him finally broke. James Spencer was arranging a tower of sweets when he saw it. The Duke stood alone near the terrace doors, watching the couples dance. His face was expressionless, but his hands trembled slightly as he held his glass of brandy. A young debutante approached, smiling, clearly encouraged by her mother. She offered conversation, smiled, flirted discreetly. The Duke responded with automatic courtesy. And then, in the middle of a sentence, he stopped. He looked at the young woman, pretty, lively, eligible, and saw only nothing. He excused himself, stepped out onto the terrace. James, carrying an empty tray back toward the kitchens, passed close enough to hear. The Duke stood alone, his hands braced against the stone balustrade, his shoulders taut, and he whispered, so softly James almost missed it, "What have I done?" That same night, back at his desk, James wrote, "The Patmore Chronicles. There are punishments society does not impose, yet the heart executes with cruel precision. The Duke of Ashford remains among us, impeccable, untouchable, admired. But this chronicler, who observes more than he ought, perceives it clearly. He bears the weight of an absence of his own making. While she learned to live without London, he is learning that London without her means nothing. And perhaps, just perhaps, he is beginning to understand that exiling someone does not erase their presence, it merely transforms it into longing. Signed, T.P. The following morning, the Duke of Ashford summoned his valet. "Prepare my carriage," he ordered, his voice firm for the first time in months. "I leave for Yorkshire at dawn." The valet blinked, surprised. "Shall I notify the Duchess, Your Grace?" A pause. "No," the Duke replied at last. "I will tell her myself." In the small hours of that night, he understood there had been no victory in sending her away. At dawn, he made the only decision left to him: to depart. The journey from London to Yorkshire took 3 days. 3 days in which the Duke of Ashford had far too much time to think, to question, to regret. With every mile travelled, the certainty that had driven him that first morning began to fade, replaced by a corrosive doubt. What will I say to her? Will she receive me? Do I even have the right to ask for anything? The landscape changed as they moved northward. London, with its elegant buildings and bustling streets, gave way to green fields, then rolling hills, and finally to the dark, wind-swept moors of Yorkshire. He slept poorly at every inn. He lay awake, rehearsing words that sounded false even in his own mind. "Evangeline, I am sorry. Insufficient. I made a mistake. Obvious. I need you. Selfish." On the third night he gave up rehearsing. He would simply go, and hope that upon seeing her the right words might come. Thornfield Hall appeared at dusk on the third day, etched against a leaden sky. The estate was imposing yet austere. Grey stone, narrow windows, surrounded by moorland stretching as far as the eye could see. Isolated, exactly as he had ordered. Guilt tightened around his chest with physical force. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. The local butler, a white-haired man with rigid posture, descended the steps, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "We were not expecting—" "I know," the Duke interrupted, stepping down from the carriage. "Where is the Duchess?" A brief pause. "In the rear gardens, Your Grace. She often walks there at this hour." The Duke nodded, dismissing him. He crossed the entrance hall, severe, well-kept, but devoid of life, and continued through the doors that opened onto the back of the estate. And then he saw her. Evangeline stood with her back to him, near a stone wall covered in wild vines. She wore a simple dress of dark blue wool, without the ornaments and structures demanded by London fashion. Her hair, once always pinned into elaborate styles, now fell partly loose, strands escaping a careless knot. She held a sketchbook and a piece of charcoal, drawing something he could not see. The cold wind stirred her skirt. She did not look unhappy. She did not look broken. She looked different, stronger, more real. He stood frozen, unable to move, simply watching, memorizing, trying to understand when it had last been that he had truly looked at her, not as a duty, not as a convenient arrangement, but as a person. And he realized, with brutal clarity, he never had. It was the sound of his footsteps on the gravel that alerted her. Evangeline turned, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she closed her sketchbook slowly, her expression cautious. "Your Grace," she said, her voice controlled, devoid of emotion. She offered a brief, formal curtsy. He hated it. The distance, the courteous chill. You created this, he reminded himself. Evangeline, he began, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat. May we speak? She hesitated, glanced toward the house, as though considering refusal, escape, avoidance. Then she nodded. Very well. She did not invite him inside. She simply began walking through the garden, keeping a respectful distance between them. He followed, his hands clasped behind his back, his heart beating unevenly. They walked in silence for several minutes. It was she who finally broke it. Why are you here? Direct, without pretense. He swallowed hard. I needed to see you. Why? The question was simple. The answer impossible. Because he missed her. But how could he miss someone he had never truly known? Because he regretted it? But regret did not erase 9 months of abandonment. Because he had finally understood he had committed a monstrous mistake. True, but insufficient. Because, he said at last, I realized I cannot go on living as though you do not exist. She stopped walking, turned to face him. But that is precisely what your grace has done for 9 months. The accusation was just. He did not contest it. Yes, he admitted quietly. It is. No letters, no visits, not a single word. I know. You know? Her voice rose slightly, the first crack in her armor of calm. Do you know what it is like to wake every day waiting for someone to care, if only a little, whether you are alive or dead? Do you know what it is like to write letters that are never answered? Do you know what it is like to realize your own husband has forgotten you as though you were furniture left behind in a distant estate? Each word was a blade. He deserved every cut. No, he said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. I do not know, but I know that I was cowardly, cruel, and profoundly, unforgivably unjust. Evangeline crossed her arms, her jaw tight. And what has changed? Why now? Why, after all this time, does your grace decide to cross England? Because I can no longer pretend. Pretend what? That I do not miss you, that I do not think of you, that London, my entire life, has not become empty without you. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Empty. Your grace had 9 months to realize that. 9 months in which I learned how to live without London. Without you. Without any illusion that our marriage meant anything. Evangeline, no. She raised a hand, stopping him. Do not come here after months of silence expecting me to simply... What? Forgive? Forget? Return to being the invisible Duchess I was never good enough to be? His words lodged in his throat. You were good enough, he said at last. The problem was never you. It was me, my pride, my inability to see me as a person, she finished, her voice sharp. To treat me as a wife and not an obligation? Yes. The silence that followed was dense, charged. Evangeline looked away, her eyes fixed on the distant moors. I spent months blaming myself, she said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. Thinking I had failed, that I was not beautiful enough, not intelligent enough, not interesting enough, that if I were better, perhaps you would notice me. He felt as though a blade had been driven between his ribs. But then, she continued, I realized it was not about me. It never was. You did not want a wife. You wanted a decorative figure, and when even that became inconvenient, you simply discarded me. I did not discarded, she repeated, meeting his eyes again. And now you come here asking, what exactly? That I return? That I pretend none of this happened? That I be grateful your grace has finally remembered he has a wife? No. He stepped forward, hands extended, pleading. I am not asking you to forget. I am not asking you to pretend. I am asking for a chance to begin again, to truly know you, to be the husband I should have been from the beginning. And if I say no, the question struck him like a physical blow. Then, he said, his voice trembling, I will respect your decision, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing that I lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. Evangeline studied him in silence. There was sincerity in his eyes, genuine remorse. But there were also 9 months of solitude, 9 months of tears she had sworn never to shed again, 9 months in which she had learned she did not need him in order to survive. I cannot simply forgive, she said at last. Not like this. Not because your grace crossed England and spoke beautiful words. I know. And I will not return to London as though nothing has changed, because I have changed. I am no longer the frightened girl who accepted a marriage of convenience because she had no alternative. I have learned that I am stronger than I thought, that I deserve more than crumbs of attention. You do, he agreed, his voice thick. You deserve everything. And I was too foolish to see it. She sighed, weary. I do not know if I can trust you again. Then let me prove it, he said, taking another step and stopping just inches from her. Let me stay. Here. Not in London, where everything is appearances and obligations. But here. Let me know you. Let me show you that I can be different. For how long? As long as you need. Evangeline looked at him, truly looked, searching for signs of falsehood, of manipulation. She found only a broken man, willing to crawl if necessary. 1 week, she said at last. You may stay 1 week, and then I will decide. It was not forgiveness, but it was a door left ajar, and for him, in that moment, it was everything. The week that followed was unlike anything they had ever known. The Duke did not behave as a duke. He demanded no special treatment, kept no aristocratic distance. He rose early and walked with her across the moors. He listened as she spoke of the books she had read, the sketches she had drawn, the things she had learned about herself. They talked over dinner, real conversations, not hollow formalities. He spoke of Parliament, of London, of how everything had seemed to lose its meaning. She spoke of loneliness, of anger, of the day she decided to stop waiting for him. And slowly, gradually, something began to change. It was not love, not yet, but it was possibility. On the 6th day, during an evening walk, he stopped near the same stone wall where he had first seen her. May I ask you something? He said. She nodded. Why are you giving me this chance? After everything? Why? Evangeline remained silent for a moment, considering. Because, she said finally, I realized that holding on to resentment would bind me to the past just as much as you once bound me here. And because, she hesitated, because I saw something in your eyes when you arrived, something I had never seen before. What? Fear, she replied, meeting his gaze. Fear of losing me. And that made me realize that perhaps for the first time you truly see me. He took her hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She did not. "I see you," he whispered, "and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again." At the end of the week, Evangeline made her decision. She would return to London, but not as the invisible Duchess she had once been. She would return as an equal, as a partner, with a voice, with choices, with respect, and he agreed to everything. 2 months later, when they returned together to Mayfair, society was stunned, not only because the Duchess had returned, but because the Duke looked at her in a way no one had ever seen before, with adoration, with respect, with love. James Spencer watched from the counter of his confectionery as the ducal carriage passed down the street. Through the window, he saw the Duke take his wife's hand. He saw her smile, a genuine smile. They reunited as equals. She returned by her own choice. He abandoned his pride. And a matured love triumphed, not as scandal, but as a quiet lesson to all of Mayfair. And that night, he wrote his final chronicle about them, the Patmore Chronicles. Esteemed readers, this season has taught us many lessons, but none so eloquent as this. True love rarely begins at the altar. At times it must cross deserts of solitude, oceans of pride, and mountains of regret before it finds fertile ground. The Duchess of Ashford survived exile, not because she was weak and needed protection, but because she was strong enough to rebuild herself far from the eyes that judged her. The Duke of Ashford nearly did not survive longing, not because he was fragile, but because he finally understood that prestige without love is merely solitude well dressed. When they returned to London, they did not return as they once were. They returned as they might have been from the beginning, equals, partners, lovers. And perhaps, just perhaps, they taught this rigid society that arranged marriages may become chosen love. If there is courage enough to admit one's errors, humility enough to ask forgiveness, and wisdom enough to begin again. For she survived exile, he survived learning. And together they proved that even the cruelest society can be made to witness the triumph of true love. With eternal admiration, Tom Patmore.